Also keeping us busy is free agency.
Yeah.
So let's get into Mike Renner's piece. Wrote it on the site over at ProFootballFocus.com, projecting landing spots for the NFL's top free agents. Now, this is tough. I mean, you've got one team out of 32 that you're picking for these guys, assuming, or out of 31, assuming that they don't go back to their current team. I didn't print that out that well.
No,
that was the front page, and I flipped. Just stick with it, though.
All right. Okay.
And we'll go through his list and hit on some of the big names and where they landed, shall we?
I was just curious where he put Le'Veon Bell, because I'm reliably informed that a couple of teams are just a Le'Veon Bell away from the Super Bowl.
Yes, that would be false.
Oh,
that would be false. An interesting place where he put him. We'll get to him when we get there.
Okay.
Because this is a take that Renner has been sticking with this entire offseason. I'll explain it when we get there. So let's start at the top. PFF's #1 free agent is Demarcus Lawrence of the Dallas Cowboys. Franchise tag aside, if he hits the open market, Mike had him going to the Indianapolis Colts because they have so much cap room. This will probably be a common theme. Everybody projecting big-name players going to the Colts in free agency.
Right. This is like when we used to run that kind of free agent competition where it was just predict the landing spots of whatever. And whoever had the most cap room,
you just put them for everybody.
Right. The top 25 people should all be going there because they're going to get a couple of them.
It's like you knew the Dolphins were going to overspend, the Redskins were going to overspend. You just put them for a bunch of teams. I think the Colts would be a good one. Schematically, what they're doing, playing a lot more zone behind a four-man rush, needing just consistent pass rushers off the edge. That's been a massive need in Indianapolis for a few years now, and Demarcus Lawrence is the best one on the board.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think obviously returning to Dallas makes a lot of sense for them. He's become this talismanic figure up front, and they still need that guy, whether it's retaining him with the franchise tag or finding a way to commit him to the long-term deal. I think returning there makes a lot of sense. But yeah, the Colts have got the money to spend. They've got the need for a top-tier edge rusher, and he's probably the #1 guy you would attack.
And then our #2 free agent, Earl Thomas, the safety from the Seattle Seahawks. Mike has going to the Green Bay Packers. And I do think, Earl's going to get projected to all of those classic Seattle cover 3 type teams, the 49ers, the Falcons, the Chargers. Again, cap space aside, just all of those teams that are running the same scheme. But he goes with the Packers, who did run a lot of single high. They ran middle of the field safety 61% of their snaps, as he writes in the article. They lost or traded Clinton Dix last year. This would be an interesting fit for the Packers.
Yeah, and also given how young that secondary is, like they're full of these players they've been drafting, particularly a corner, it kind of makes sense for them to get one aging veteran to tie it all together.
Get a general in the back end.
Right. So, I think it makes some sense.
And a guy who can turn the ball over, get the ball back to Aaron Rodgers.
Also helps.
Mike's just hopeful, I think, that he goes to the Green Bay Packers. #3, Trey Flowers, the New England Patriots edge defender, who we raved about here last week. We got a lot of feedback on our little traditional scouting versus PFF scouting discussion, mostly positive, but of course, some people asking us for our biggest misses, perhaps something we can go back and go through our biggest hits and our biggest misses, some of the reasoning why. But Trey Flowers, the guy that we've been touting as one of our biggest hits through the years, he hits free agency as our #3 free agent. And Mike projects him to the Tennessee Titans, with the Titans continuing their whole New England South rebuilding project, yeah?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know how much. I think Trey Flowers is really good, period, but the Patriots probably maximize his use. They line him up all over the place. I think if you're going to get the best out of Trey Flowers, you need to move him around.
He's not just a pure edge defender.
It doesn't make sense. It's not that he can't do it. It's just that I think he has more impact when you do move him around and do that kind of thing. Almost the same way this, Michael Bennett was used for years, where he's fine if you just put him out on the edge. He'll be a good player, but he has a bigger impact or a more devastating impact when you do start to move him around and line him up inside and let him attack bigger, slower guards and centers in the middle. So I would want to see him land in a team that's prepared and eager to do that. I don't know if the Titans are that team.
So when you have, like the Patriots losing a lot of defensive coaches over the last couple of years, Matt Patricia to the Detroit Lions, Brian Flores down to the Miami Dolphins, those are the easy teams to also project to. Cap space aside, as far as interest goes, Lions need an edge rusher pretty badly. The Dolphins just need any kind of talent, though they're probably a couple of years away from truly revamping that roster to competing. So I don't know if they want to spend money on a Trey Flowers, but the Lions could be a team that just doesn't create pressure with their front four very well.
But with them, you've got to be questioning how much that is deliberate again, like the Patriots for years, that they're prepared to have guys that play contain more than they play edge rusher.
Yeah, but who better than Flowers? I mean, Flowers was by far the Patriots' best.
Right, but the question would be...
They're building the same system there.
Right, but the question would be, if you're going to do that, how much do you care who the guy is? Like, when you can just install...
It's not easy and interchangeable, though. Like, Trey Flowers played at a higher level than other Patriots edges over the last 4 years.
But the hardest point of doing that is... The hardest point of playing on the edge is rushing the passer and generating pressure. If that is secondary to just occupy the space, maintain, contain, and then push the pocket, like that becomes a way more replaceable position than the guy that needs to get speed edge rush.
Yeah, perhaps. Would be a lot of money for Flowers. But don't hate the fit for the Tennessee Titans there. The number 4 guy on our list, Brandon Graham, to the Los Angeles Rams. I didn't think of that one yet.
No.
So Ndamukong Suh's a free agent, so it's not like the same narrative of, okay, they're big, they're huge in the middle, but they need help off the edge. They still need help off the edge, but they're not loaded on the interior. But you're still talking about Aaron Donald and Brandon Graham. And if Brandon Graham's good at anything, Sam, it's just creating pressure and not sacks.
Yeah.
It's getting to the top of the pocket.
Have you learned your lesson now? Or are you still...
He's a 10-sack guy next year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Depending on his landing spot, he's a 10-sack guy.
I'm going to re-up the bet for next year?
Probably.
Yeah?
Probably will.
Okay.
I'm gonna double down on Brandon Graham.
I'll happily
I'm just saying, when you pressure the quarterback 55 to 70 times every year, you're going to stumble into 10 sacks more often than not. He has defied the odds.
Right.
He has defied the odds for the most of his career, having one double-digit sack season.
How has it cost you lunch and you still learn nothing?
That's just lunch. It's just lunch.
Okay.
We keep talking about it's just small sample sizes. It can't be like, well, I made this one mistake, therefore I won't make it again. It's like when you flip a coin and it lands at heads 10 straight times, the next one can still be tails.
Right.
Doesn't matter.
This isn't the 50-50 proposition. This is a guy that consistently doesn't finish.
He's going to regress back to the mean with his sack totals next year. What are your thoughts on the fits of the Rams, though?
I don't hate that fit. Graham's good. He's a really good, consistent edge rusher who will generate a ton of pressure. And honestly, for the Rams in particular, that's probably all they need. They don't need the guy that's going to get sacks constantly, because even if you're just pressuring somebody, the amount of pressure Donald has on his own, you're going to get quite a few cleanup sacks from Donald wrecking the play and pushing a guy into you. B, if you can reverse that and you can get some pressure and force guys into Donald, that becomes a pretty devastating partnership.
I would say if you look back at the Rams, not that Suh was bad or anything like that, but if you had a choice between a good edge or say like a Suh next to Donald, I would absolutely take the edge, because Donald's going to win so many reps.
Right.
If you're at least keeping the quarterback at the top of the pocket, making him step up into Donald, you have a guy consistent off the edge, or you're pinching the line to double Aaron Donald, which happens quite a bit. You're getting those one-on-ones. I think it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, that would be the one landing spot where I would think Graham might get 10 sacks.
Thank you.
Just because of the volume of pressure Aaron Donald gets.
We'll see what happens to Graham in free agency, and then we'll revisit whether or not. I mean, he's getting old too, so we might talk about like a fast food lunch, maybe not a full lunch. He's just getting old.
No, look, it's all or nothing here. But Donald had 65 hurries last season, 85 hurries or hits where there was no sack involved. So those are sort of 60 to 80 plays a season that are going to be heading in a position where Graham could potentially get a free sack.
Yeah, and maybe me getting a free lunch.
Yeah.
All right, our number 5 free agent, Grady Jarrett of the Atlanta Falcons. I like this fit. Let's think about this hypothetically here. Mike has him going to the Dallas Cowboys. So this is assuming Demarcus Lawrence maybe isn't franchise tagged, or whether he is or not. What about Jarrett going to Dallas, where they've had some pretty big question marks as far as rushing the passer on the interior for a few years now?
Yeah, they've been trying to find a Grady Jarrett for a number of years.
I mean, they've had David Irving on and off steroids and on and off suspensions doing a pretty good job. But
right, and even David Irving is not really that kind
he's not
of
like
player.
Jarrett, no.
But they've, like, Malik Collins was supposed to be Grady Jarrett, essentially.
That hasn't worked out
right.
well.
That's what they were trying to do with that move and a couple of other moves in that sort of time span. Yeah, this is another case where we've been trying to get this guy, or our version of this guy, for a number of years. Let's just get this guy.
Do you think the Falcons have to keep Grady Jarrett?
I mean, yeah.
I mean, it's a need.
as much as you ever have to keep one player, they really need to kind of keep him around.
How difficult is this for a team, do you think, when you go from the situation where Grady Jarrett is one of the most valuable players on per dollar, say, in the NFL the last couple of years. He's on this rookie contract, fifth round contract, and then all of a sudden, just to keep the same production, you have to pay him like 10 times more.
Yeah,
those are tough decisions to make. The Patriots with Trey Flowers, same thing. The Falcons with Grady Jarrett. Those are tough decisions to make here.
Right, but a lot of that has to be appreciating that you had him on a steal the first place. You know what I mean? Like, it's not, you're swinging from potentially swinging to potentially overpaying him, having been criminally underpaying him for the
But that doesn't help you going forward.
No, it doesn't. But it's not like, you're not going from a position where, well, he's getting paid what he should be now to, okay, now he's getting overpaid. You've been making out like a bandit for years. Now it finally catches up to you.
All right, the next guy he's got going is JADEVEON CLOWNEY going to the Raiders.
Yeah, I don't have any. I mean, this is kind of new still to the John Gruden era, so we've no idea really what his tendencies are, particularly now with Mike Mayock running the draft, or there's a lot of unknowns in how they actually treat personnel within that building. Other than so far they've shipped all of it out, but Clowney feels to me like a John Gruden kind of player. Where you get caught up with the measurables and the highlights and the look at that play where he knocked the guy's helmet off against Michigan.
If this got paired with the other thing that we're seeing the Raiders do quite a bit in off-season mock drafts, which is at number 4 taking Rashawn Gary from Michigan, who is Mr. Measurables. We've talked about this on the pod a few times. Mr. Measurables, not really Mr. Production. There's a lot of question marks with him producing at the next level. And JADEVEON CLOWNEY is a very, very good player, but not an elite pass rusher. He's a very good run defender. He's never gotten after the quarterback at a high level. This would be one of those moves for the Raiders if they really wanted to revamp their pass rush by taking the number 4 pick and taking Gary and then putting all the money into JADEVEON CLOWNEY, where they might not put a huge dent in their league worst pass rush, despite the high investment.
I mean, we may be doing them a huge disservice, and they might not be like this at all, but the Raiders definitely feel like a team that would be all in on freaky athleticism and trying to teach him how to play. Now, Clowney's better than that, but he's still a way better athlete than he is a football player.
This next one's interesting, Sam. Landon Collins, the Giants' safety, going to the Bengals, and I'm going to quote Mike Renner. How does Landon Collins, linebacker, sound? That may even be his best position and would immediately transform Cincinnati's linebacking core. Cincinnati with one of the worst coverage linebacker situations in the NFL for a few years now, and Mike has stood by this notion that Collins, I mean, we all agree he's a great box player, playing close to the line of scrimmage, but actually moving him to linebacker is something I haven't really thought of. I'm not saying I would do it, but this is what he does here with the Bengals.
So how about this for an existential question? What is the difference now between a box safety only and either a dime linebacker or just a weak side linebacker, period?
Well, I think, so like in Collins' case, I don't think you want to make him a true linebacker because the best stuff that he does is play, say, quarters safety. So first off, if you're talking about in dime, and he did this at Alabama he would cover the slot. I think early in his career he would be the dime linebacker, so he'd actually play linebacker. I think the difference is more, what do you want this guy's skill set to be? I don't want him playing safety in the box is different from playing linebacker in the box. So when you're playing linebacker in the box, you're in between the tackles. You're much more likely in the run game to have to take on guards and get blocked. Whereas the safety, as the 8th man in the box, the Cam Chancellor role in cover 1 and cover 3, you're most of the time going to be unblocked, and you're the fill player, and you're just going to have some unblocked opportunities. Most safeties you want in that role rather than having them have to take on blocks.
So that's the issue, is that it's that you are likely to be unblocked. So I think the thing that Collins does best is actually torpedo run plays from the backside, where he gets to hang around the line, basically time the snap, and catch the running back before the running back gets a chance to pick his hole, and progress on the other side of the play. So the running back, let's say it's a handoff going to the right, the back takes it, it's outside zone, he's sort of He's being patient in that Le'Veon Bell style, waiting for a gap to open up, and then he hits it. All the while, Collins is sprinting from the backside, catching him from behind.
Getting down the line.
Because he's not sprinting to the front side, otherwise he'd overrun the play.
Right.
Now you change that, you turn him from a safety to a linebacker. Now he's lined up off the line, he's inside, and he's going to have to work his way through actual human bodies to make the same play. He can't just chase it down from the backside because he'd be opening up a gap inside to do that. So, I mean, there are very real differences between this addition box safety and playing straight linebacker. And as much as body types, they're basically the same guy now, a 220-pound strong safety.
But it is a different skill set.
Linebackers are 220 pounds these days. So you're not talking about, you know, back in the day, you were talking about a guy needing to add 20 pounds of muscle to play that position. You're not anymore, but what they're asked to do is very different.
So I agree there. And I also think, you know, the Bengals don't have a defensive coordinator right now, so we don't really know what scheme they're going to run.
Right.
But the old Bengals scheme that was very too high centric, where they had two high safeties, they'd run cover 2, cover 4, cover 6. So essentially, at worst, you're playing a half field, deep coverage responsibility, which Landon Collins can do. He has enough range to do that. If you have him as a single high roll, no good. No bueno. He's not Earl Thomas, not even close. But then the quarters roll is the one I really like, where essentially you're playing about 8 yards depth. You're going to take any vertical receiver your way. So you're kind of like reading it, and if he runs a deep enough route, you cover him one-on-one. Landon can do that. But more importantly, if you don't have that vertical receiver, you're either helping out with another deep route or you're working downhill to the line of scrimmage. In the run game, you're working downhill to the line of scrimmage. You're essentially like a box player. You have a box player type of read, but also with some deep responsibility, if that makes sense to our listeners. That was where Landon Collins would really shine in that Giants role. So he would be perfect for the old Bengal system that they've run the last couple of years, which was zone heavy, too high heavy. I don't know what they're going to run.
Right.
And I certainly don't. I'm not ready to move him to linebacker. I like him in this too high safety role.
Anyway, free agents.
All right, so back to free agency. We've got Frank Clark going to the Cleveland Browns, my division rival here. This is what Mike said. Frank Clark to pair with Myles Garrett. This would be kind of a dream scenario, I think, for the Browns, because you have Larry Ogunjobi in the middle, and now you've got a pretty fierce front four.
You do.
Or at least 3 out of 4.
Right. This makes a lot of sense, actually. The Browns are one of those teams that have enough money to spend to make this kind of impact. Frank Clark's young. He's got incredible ability. He's made some really big-time plays. He's another guy, a bit like Donnell Hunter, who feels like they may never quite get to as good as they look like they have the potential to. But because you have Myles Garrett there already, he doesn't need to. Like, if he doesn't get any better at all, but he still maintains the ability to kind of wreck people every now and again, that's more than good enough for a complimentary number 2 pass rusher.
But you're explaining that from PFF terms, and I think people need to understand what that means, because Hunter has crazy sack totals the last few years. Clark has high sack totals the last few years.
Sack totals are a bad way of measuring pass rush.
Yeah, and their sack totals have been much higher than their PFF grade, would indicate the PFF grade is not only, it's more stable, but it's also, unless like half of your pressures turn into sacks, the PFF grade is more indicative of actual impact.
Right, it's just a better way of measuring how a guy actually rushed the passer. If a guy is rushing the passer 500 times in a season, you're telling me that the difference between a guy being good or bad is whether he had 10 or 15 sacks. Those 5 plays in 500 rushes, you're telling me those are actually an accurate reflection of which guy was better.
I'm not telling you that.
No, but people are. And that's before you even get to the idea that those 5 sacks might be entirely worthless plays in terms of what that guy actually did, right? Maybe those 5 plays were him beating a guy immediately and making a really impactful sack. And then we can have a debate as to how much 5 plays that are sacks is actually worth over a season. Having said that, maybe those 5 sacks were he happened to be standing in front of a quarterback who was rolling out to his right and sacked himself. Or he was the closest guy to a quarterback running down a blind alley to the sideline who sacked himself by running out of bounds. Or somebody else makes a play up the middle and you happen to be standing there as the quarterback ran into you. Sack, right? These are all plays that any pass rusher could and should make, and you're trying to tell me those 5 plays
they're all weighed the same when it comes to sack totals.
Right, but they're
not weighed the same in PFF
So
grade.
the difference between that and PFF grade is we're actually quantifying every single one of those 500 pass rushes and telling you how much of an impact he made in terms of beating blockers and rushing the passer. So sacks are nice. That's what everybody's trying to do. Nobody will argue that the sack is the most valuable play on a play level, but not necessarily because of the guy that ended up with the sack, right?
He doesn't deserve full credit for it all the time necessarily.
So that's what you're shooting for, but that is it's a terrible way of measuring how good a guy actually was rushing the passer.
So that would be a good fit for the Cleveland Browns, and that brings up an interesting discussion on the next prediction here, which is D Ford going to the Seattle Seahawks. Here's what would scare me about this with the Seattle Seahawks. If they don't bring back Frank Clark, putting all their eggs into the D Ford basket, which is 1 year of production, his 3-year grades, 63.6, 59.4, and then last year's 88.6, which is nice, but how much can you bank on that for next year going forward?
Right, that's what would terrify me. I think anything other than D Ford getting franchise tagged to me is crazy, because
keep him motivated. It's like essentially like your chance to make it a prove it deal.
It's the Demarcus Lawrence deal. Yeah. It's okay, you did it once. That was surprising. Show me you can do it again before I want to actually commit long-term money to you. Now, Demarcus Lawrence did, and Demarcus Lawrence, I think, had shown more before the 1 year crazy breakout than D Ford has.
Right.
Like, D Ford has almost entirely shown nothing until this year in a contract year. Now, call me a cynic, but I just want more guarantees than that before I'm going to throw giant money at you.
The franchise tag is essentially protection for a team against contract years. It's not what its initial intention is.
But that's what it is.
But it is how you use it, and that'd be a great way for the Chiefs to use it with D Ford. All right, any other... we don't have to hit each one of them. Let's jump down to Le'Veon Bell one.
Yeah.
Le'Veon Bell to the Baltimore Ravens.
Okay.
And Mike's take this entire offseason. Yeah, the logic is that, look, if you're going to build around Lamar Jackson... If
you're going to run the ball 900 times in a year, let's get a running back that can, A, do that, and B, give more to the game than that.
And plus, you've got the great Gus Edwards sitting there, too, had a nice season. You just give him a break with Le'Veon Bell.
Right.
Good backup for Gus Edwards.
But the whole point is, the Ravens run the ball more than anybody else in the league. So you're going to need more than one guy. You're going to need a stable of ball carriers. And Le'Veon Bell is a guy that has been the bell cow for another team. Plus, he's a devastating receiver, so he can give you these matchup problems.
On the other hand...
I like the move.
On the other hand, Le'Veon Bell is valuable because of what he does as a receiver.
Yes.
He's extremely valuable because of that. He's a good running back, but as a receiver, he's extremely valuable. So you'd actually rather him in a Steelers offense that uses him, a Patriots offense that uses him, an offense that uses the running back as a receiver, and the Ravens would not do that other than maybe a few screens.
Yeah.
So you diminish a little bit of his value there.
I would kind of like to see him with the Houston Texans.
Le'Veon with the Houston Texans.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't know why.
Why?
I mean, there's a few reasons, but I think it's a nice fit. One, their offensive line is terrible, and he's, I think, been a reasonable player at working behind a bad offensive line in the past. He's one of the few players that I think is capable of making a line look better than it is, because of that patient running style that we talked about before is not simply being patient. It's actually maneuvering defensive players to help blockers, right? Like, he'll force the defensive player to peek in the wrong gap and then jump back into the other one, whereby his blocker gets a better shot than he had before where he was losing. So Le'Veon Bell can kind of manufacture gaps that wouldn't be there for most running backs, which you probably need to do if your offensive line sucks. Two, I would like the Texans to have a receiving option that is not Nuke Hopkins. Like, at some point, this idea of Watkins,
we've got
Watson
Will Fuller
to Hopkins is going to need something
coming off
else.
Injury.
Right, Fuller maybe, but I would like to see Le'Veon Bell there as a receiving weapon as well. So, plus you have the money to spend, which is the other thing.
Interesting fit. You hate the Texans. The Texans fans hate you, but that's a good way to...
I'm just saying, it can't be quarterback to receiver, nothing else forever.
I appreciate your takes there. Here's one that stood out to me on this list. Jordan Hicks, the Philadelphia Eagles linebacker, going to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, Hicks has battled injuries quite a bit, but when you talk about the Steelers, their inability to cover in the middle of the field, Ryan Shazier going through his injury a few years ago when he had started to turn things around and become that middle of the field force, it's a major need for the Steelers, and Hicks, quietly one of the better coverage linebackers when he's healthy in the NFL.
Yeah. There's one more that I think is worth talking about.
The QB?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nick Foles to the Jacksonville Jaguars. I mean,
okay, so what would you do if you're the Jaguars? All right, you're the Jaguars. You're sitting there at number 7.
Draft a quarterback.
You would just draft a quarterback.
Yes.
Would you bring in Nick Foles insurance?
Actually, the first thing I would do if I was sitting there at number 7 is ask the question, how good is the best quarterback in this draft, and how sure are we that the next guy is a significant downgrade from him? So if I'm 7, right, we've already talked about 1, 2, and 3 probably don't need quarterbacks, right? So if you need to get to 3 or maybe 4 to secure yourself the number 1 quarterback in this draft, you're asking yourself, if you're 7, is there a Baker Mayfield in this draft? And how far is the drop-off between him and everybody else, right?
We would say that there's not.
Correct. Having said that, we would say that the gap from 1 to 2 is significant.
My issue with Kyler
on the field.
Kyler is our number 1 quarterback.
Yes.
Dwayne Haskins is our number 2 quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
We have some question marks about Haskins based off the grading. He's only done it for 1 year. Kyler had good grading. He's only done it for 1 year. He comes with question marks of his own beyond the height thing because of, this whole, is he really dedicated to football and all these different things. Like, he comes with far more questions than, say, Baker Mayfield or any of the quarterbacks last year, I think.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't want to say it like that. Only 1 year of really good production from Kyler. So all of our numbers are pointing to him being the guy, but I feel better about what we thought about Sam Darnold, I think, last year than I do about Kyler.
You should be drafting a quarterback with your first-round pick, and the thing you should be doing right now is asking yourself the question of whether we should be looking to trade up to secure the number 1 quarterback in this draft.
What if you can't? What if it's now between, we think Kyler's number 1.
Well, you can. It's just, how much do you want to do it?
So you want to sacrifice the rest of your roster to go get your guy.
Why is the rest of your roster?
I don't know. The rest of your draft.
You're at number 7. How much do you need to give up to get to 3?
A lot. It's a significant move. It's going to be a hot commodity, those top 3. What are your
saying,
thoughts on if they can't get Kyler and Haskins is our number 2 quarterback? We think there's a drop-off there. And you're debating between Haskins at 7 and Nick Foles.
Well, that's the question you got to ask yourself.
I'd go Haskins, but
yes,
I would draft a QB.
We don't know what Haskins is, right? We have theories and we have educated guesses based on tape, but the college to NFL jump is always a big question mark. You can never be sure until it happens. You kind of know what Nick Foles is, right?
I think
now you don't know what he is week to week, but you know what he is overall.
Yeah, week to week he's going to be what you don't know.
Right.
I think I'm of the mind if I'm rebuilding a team, I'm not paying big money to Nick Foles because I think ultimately he has a Flacco type of year as a full-time starter. As many question marks as that come with Kyler or Haskins, I would try to take one of those guys. Where I think it gets iffy is the Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, Will Greers of the world. I have more question marks about them. But I don't want to tie myself to Nick Foles or Teddy Bridgewater necessarily to long-term deals. If I can get Teddy on the cheap because people still don't have faith in him.
Also, by the way, the Jags don't have any money.
Tell Mike.
I think
he's just looking for good fits.
I think they have the least cap room.
You can make money
in the NFL.
You can always make money.
I mean, sure, but you're going to for a quarterback that just turned down a $20 million option, you're going to have to make a lot of money.
All right, one last thing. Jawan James to the Houston Texans in this whole creep back toward average on your offensive line.
Any offensive lineman.